Welcome to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. I'm your host, Fabian motherfucking Ojeda, and I don't know shit, but that's okay. All right, let's get this shit started. Thank you everybody for listening to the Ignorance is Strength podcast. Hope y'all enjoyed the last episode with Cortland Tyler. That guy's out there making animes, making video games. We'll probably hear more from his team at some point. He's got a lot of people that I'm going to interview. But I'm back today with a brand new guest. Really excited to talk to him. And I want to welcome to the podcast for the very first time, Mr. A.X. Foster. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Great to be with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm interested because I saw your bio and got a lot going on there, man.
I'm a busy dude. I had an interesting life. That's true.
Yeah. And so, I've interviewed a lot of people that are authors and whatnot, and I always ask about the process and everything like that. But, today I'm not really so much interested in the process of becoming an author. I'm more interested in, your background, because it really kind of, it gives a lot of legitimacy to your writing, and a lot of the time, when people write and it's, fiction and stuff like that, they get a lot of things wrong, And in your specific case, I know that you write like thrillers and a lot of it has to do with courtroom stuff, right? And so that's your specialty right there, right?
Yeah, well, I wrote a legal thriller, which is a courtroom drama. My book, which is called Gavel to Gavel, is kind of like the TV show Law and Order. Okay. It takes readers inside a courtroom, and you have a judge, you have a prosecutor, you have a defendant, you have a public defender, and you have a murder trial. And the reader is placed in the position of a juror, and they get evidence and they listen to testimony. And the reader has to decide whether this woman is guilty of killing her husband or not. So that's the process of the book. Now, you mentioned my background. I was a prosecutor here in the Washington, D.C. area for 20 years. And then I opened up my own law firm as a defense attorney. And I've been doing that for the last 15 years. So I have 35 years experience inside a courtroom. And yes, the book is based on my own life experiences doing murder trials. Yeah,
for sure. Now I want to get into that, right? So, how is that? It's kind of always been like when you were growing up and stuff. Was that like your dream? Like I want to be a lawyer. I want to get into helping people. Or no, what did you want to do?
No. Everyone has their own life path, and sometimes those paths are unexpected, and you have twists and turns. I mean, did you think you were going to be hosting, podcast, radio show?
We had no idea what the hell podcasts were.
Yeah. So for me personally, I was an actor. I was a theater major in college. And I was in New York City doing television, doing soap operas. I was an actor, and I got disenchanted with doing that. And I wanted to go to law school to help other actors and athletes. I was going to do sports and entertainment law and become an agent maybe. And when I went to law school, I totally fell in love with criminal law, and I wasn't expecting that. And then they had an internship in my law school where you could go in the courtroom. And that was it for me. I decided I wanted to do that instead of becoming an agent. And I got a job as a prosecutor straight out of law school. Wow. I thought I would be there like 1 or 2 years, but I ended up staying 20 years and doing over 100 jury trials, did a lot of murder cases, domestic violence, sexual assault. Even animal cruelty cases. I was kind of a specialist in that area too. And as I say, I ended up staying there for 20 years. So as a kid, no, I wasn't expecting to be a writer or a lawyer, but here we are. So I'll take it.
Yeah, for sure. And then you mentioned the different kind of cases that, you were a part of. And when I was reading your bio, I'm like, dang, child abuse, homicide, even, the animal, a lot of people don't even think about like animal cruelty, but animal cruelty, and all these things can be very like, how probably pretty gruesome sometimes, right? And like really, taxing on your mind and everything, right?
Yeah, that's actually very, very perceptive of you, Fabian, to pick up on that, because there is a concept in my line of work called secondary victimization. It's kind of like PTSD, but you do see. I remember I've been to a lot of cocktail parties where I've looked around and said I've seen more dead bodies with my own eyes than all these people put together, because I've been called to a lot of crime scenes. I've been to an autopsy. So those are gruesome things, but you have to compartmentalize those things and do your job. It's similar or analogous to an emergency room physician. Someone comes in who's been shot or in a car accident. You can't freak out about it. You have to be clinical, put that stress and that emotion aside and do your job. That's kind of what it's like being a criminal defense attorney or a prosecutor. But you're right. I have seen a lot of really ugly things, and sometimes I wish I hadn't. But they're in your mind, and you always take comfort that you're helping people.
Right.
And I've done a lot of child abuse cases. They're some of the worst for this secondary victimization. But when it's all said and done, I've helped a child get justice, or I've put a bad guy in jail, and that's what makes it worthwhile. So yeah, it's true what you say, but those of us in our profession just have to keep carrying on to get the job done.
Yeah. Is there and I think this is going to really kind of tie into, when we talk about your book, right? Was there any like one case that really kind of just it hit you so much that you're like, man, this is just a crazy story, right? And I mean, I can't get it out of my head. I need to talk to people about it. And of course, you can tell us whatever you can tell us, but what I think sometimes when that creative process comes through, like you draw back to like, what influenced you to put pen to paper, what influenced you to put this story out there? Was there like any or one or a few stories where you're like, man, this is just so it's so crazy?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, I always wanted to write a book like this. I've always been fascinated with murder mysteries, even going back to when I was a boy. I read all the Hardy Boys and those kind of books. And I read a lot of detective stories and Sherlock Holmes and that kind of stuff when I was young. I just never had the time to really sit down. It's a long process to write a book. But when COVID hit about 2020, about 3 years ago, they slowed things down in the courthouse here. And I figured this is a good opportunity for me to finally write this book. And I wrote a manuscript during COVID and showed it to some people who were like, this is good, and you should change this and work on that. And it shaped up to be my book, Gavel to Gavel. And then it was published, and now it's like exploding all over the place on Facebook and Instagram and Book Talk and everywhere. And it's a lot of people are enjoying the story. The story in my case about a very wealthy woman who kills her husband, and is she the victim of domestic violence, so she's just defending herself, or is she trying to kill the guy so she can get a huge inheritance? That's really the storyline in my book. It is based on a mix-up of several cases that I handled as a prosecutor. And then in the story, the prosecutor's faced with a very difficult ethical dilemma. New evidence is discovered halfway through the trial, and the prosecutor has to make a decision. Do I disclose this to the other side in the court, or do I keep it secret to win my case? And those kind of decisions always face a prosecutor. And that's what is also going on in the book. What does the prosecutor do? Is winning at all costs worth it when you're trying to put a dangerous person in jail? Do the ends justify the means? Or are you obligated under rules of law? That's really one of the main themes in my book.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'm wondering, the way you were explaining that, right? As you've been a prosecutor, right? If you've been in those, dilemmas where you're like, oh, do I do this? Do I go this way? Right. And so are you drawing from your experiences where, you've been in the shoes of your character there?
Right. Well, yes, absolutely. In the book, the prosecutor faces this terrible dilemma. Here's what happens. So a little girl who's only 9 years old sees her mother kill her father with a knife, and she's the only eyewitness, but she has disabilities and has difficulty communicating. So the prosecutor has a very vulnerable witness, a child. And halfway through the murder trial, after the jury's been picked and the evidence is coming in, the little girl's diary is discovered. And the question becomes, is she telling the truth or is she lying? And does the prosecutor have an obligation to give that diary to the defendant and her lawyer, or should he keep it in order to win his case? So that is really what's happening in my book, Gavel to Gavel. And that actually is based on a case that I know of. I didn't handle that case, but I know the prosecutor who did. And she had a child abuse case where a diary was discovered. And should she have given it up or should she have kept it a secret? So I kind of borrowed that for my book. And the rest of the story is just a combination of real, very highly realistic courtroom scenes that are told through my own eyes because I've seen it. I've been in there. I've done it. And so I got a lot of satisfaction writing the book. And I've been told by my readers that it's very realistic. Of course, it's not so realistic because sometimes court is boring, but it moves fast and there's a lot going on. And you really get to learn what it's like to be on a jury for a murder trial.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned, people are really interested in this, but, it can be boring because, like, when I think of court, I'm just like, everybody wants to avoid that jury duty, right?
Right.
Until you get assigned to, like, something like a big, trial, and there's like media and things like that. That's like I think something that's very relatable, right?
I mean, look, everyone gets called for jury duty sooner or later. The way it works here on the East Coast, if you vote or you have a driver's license, your name is on the list. I get called for jury duty every 5 years or something, and I always get kicked off right away. Nobody wants me on their jury because I know too much. But it's a process that makes everyone a little bit uncomfortable, whether I'm going to get picked or rejected. And, and do I really want to take the time out of my life to do this? I devote 2 chapters in Gavel to Gavel to the jury selection process. And a lot of the story is told from the point of view of 4 different jurors. I plant in the story 2 jurors who look like they're obviously going to be on the prosecutor's side, and 2 jurors who look like they're going to be on the defense side. So the reader doesn't know, like, well, which way is this going to end up? But I do try to bring to life the whole jury selection process because it's so mysterious to most people. And people are kind of afraid of it, but they also kind of like, that would be kind of cool. I think I would like to be on a jury. So, I try to get the reader involved in that whole angle for sure.
I'm going to get an inside little scoop here then, right? See what works and what doesn't. People, they think they figured out the whole jury selection process, and, they'll say things like, well, I can't be on a jury. I'm racist. Does that work anymore?
If you say you're racist, that's going to get you pretty well kicked off, I think. The trickier ones are some people have a plus and some people have a minus. Everyone's sort of a combination. Now, when I was the prosecutor, I would want basically, I'll call them law and order types. Mm-hmm. Anyone who's very conventional, conservative, police, law enforcement, military, the school principal, people who follow the rules. They're generally going to be favorable to the prosecution. Flip that over, and now I'm a defense attorney. I want people who go against the grain, people who are liberal, people who are rebels or outsiders or individuals, people who are willing to stand out and say, no, I'm not going to vote guilty. I don't care if all y'all say he is. So you're looking for personalities. Sometimes you look at what a profession is. Where I pick juries, you don't get a lot of information and you don't get to interview jurors. You just have to go on their name, which tells you their ethnicity maybe, where they live. You can tell if they're rich, middle class, poor, what their profession is. Are they a doctor, a lawyer, or are they unemployed, or are they artists? And then their spouse, the same thing. What does their spouse do? Like I might get someone to say housewife. And if I don't look at, well, she's married to a cop. So you have to look at the clues on paper, on the little biographical sketch, and then you look at how they behave. Is this person wearing shorts to court? Well, maybe they don't take it so seriously. The other guy's wearing a suit and tie. So you look at clues, and then, hey, man, it is really an inexact science. It's more like playing cards and flipping over a blackjack. This looks pretty good, but I'm not sure. And I've been surprised. I've had jurors that I thought were locked up on my side, and then they're the only one going the other way. So it's really hard to tell, but you see trends. Generally, for a child abuse case, I would want women, because if you're a mother, you're going to really be outraged at someone hurting a child. So in a sexual assault case, I would want women because they can relate to that. Almost every woman out there has had some sort of, sexual harassment or catcalls on the streets to assaults or worse. So women can relate to that. So, for fist fights in a bar, that's something that's very male generic. These are such stereotypes. There's exceptions to all these rules, but that's what you got to go on when you pick a jury. So in my book, I really pay a lot of attention to make that jury process clear and fun. So if anyone's out there and your listeners who's interested in that process, Gavel to Gavel, AX Foster, you heard it here first.
Yeah, for sure. That's cool. That's interesting, because people look at, and in most cases, right, profiling, they look at it as like a dirty word, right? But that's really what you have to do. You have to, profile people and just kind of generalize and things like that, because it's not a game of human chess. You don't have any control, right? Really, this is more so like a game of like craps, or human craps.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You have to take an educated guess, but you can be wrong. Now you mentioned, race relations. Like in America, race relations undercut everything that happens, everything we do, because the history of this country is so, messed up. Going back 400 years to slavery and white supremacy, and here we are all these years later. But a lot of those issues are floating around out there. It's not obvious. So, that never leaves your mind. If I represent an African-American guy, I want to get African-American jurors who might understand his experience rather than an all-white jury that's never even, been inside a black person's home and can't relate to anything. So the general thinking is, if you represent someone as a defense attorney, you want jurors who look like your client or who look like you. And when you're a prosecutor, you think about your victim. If you had an old lady who was mugged in the street, you would want to have elderly women as your jurors. Of course, these rules are such stereotypes and generalizations, and they often don't hold true. But that's how you got to pick someone. I mean, I'm not going to pick 12 people that are going to hate my client. So yeah, there's a lot of guesswork involved, but race, age, gender, socioeconomic status, all of that comes into play. I tell people, from what I've seen, I mean, I've done 100 jury trials. I've done thousands of cases to prepare. I don't think it's so much a black and white issue, like white people get away with it, black people get abused. I think it cuts more along rich versus poor.
Yep.
If you're wealthy and you're black, you get a great defense attorney like me. If you're white and you're poor, you get railroaded just like everyone else who's poor. Mm-hmm. So, people say, well, don't you see that black people don't get a fair shake, or minorities or Latinos or Asians or what have you? I say, for me, what I've seen with my own eyes over the last 35 years, it cuts across finances. It's money. You're rich, you find a way to scam the system. You're poor, you get the short end of the stick.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I can definitely get on board with that. I agree with you 100%. I think that I identify, I'm Hispanic. I can identify more with a poor white person than I can a rich Hispanic person.
Right.
Yeah. So that's absolutely true. I wanted to talk about, we're talking a little bit about, a mix of entertainment and the law and the courtroom and things like that. And sometimes, these TV shows that feature, courtrooms, they're very entertaining. I've never watched like Law and Order or anything like that. A lot of people like that. But I love, like Your Honor, Better Call Saul was as entertaining as well. And even, back in like the classic TV days, people were in love with Matlock and Perry Mason, So I wanted to ask, like, what are some of the common things out there that you see like on TV, right? And you're like, that's 100% wrong. That is bullshit. Right? Like that doesn't happen.
Here's the thing. People are fascinated with the jury trial process. We talked about being a juror, but take a look at it from afar. TV, movies, books. People are inherently interested in the drama of a trial because you have often a hero, you have a villain. You have a beginning, a middle, and a conclusion. Someone's found guilty or not guilty. So much in life, there's no conclusion. We just keep going day after day. But people are drawn to the drama of a trial because there's a process that ends with a resolution. And it's always been a subject for movies and TV shows. And also, look, there's whole channels like Court TV. There's always a trial happening somewhere in America. We had this crazy case in South Carolina where that guy Murdoch killed his wife and his son and went to trial. And, and then you had like Johnny Depp and Amber Heard duking it out. And, now we're going to have this crazy case coming out of Idaho where that guy went in the house and stabbed the 4 students. I mean, in New York City, you got this serial killer who's an architect, for God's sake. I mean, that's so bizarre. Mm-hmm. There's always something happening in this violent, crazy country we live in. Mm-hmm. And people can turn on their TV and watch. Now we have all this stuff with the former president of the United States getting indicted, every week, another one. I mean, it's just going to be like a freak show for the next 6 months, but it's going to take place inside a courtroom because where else do we solve problems like that? American law comes from English law, Anglo law, and there are only a few places in the world that still do jury trials. They're all English-speaking countries like England, America, Australia. Most of the country doesn't have a jury trial. You're tried by the judge. And our system at least lets the people decide, not the king. if I'm guilty or not. I want the people in my town, my neighbors, I want them to decide. That's where the jury system has evolved from. It's not perfect, trust me. I wrote a whole book on it, but it's the best we can do, I think, for finding the truth. If someone committed a crime, did something to break the social contract, it's the best system that we've devised, although it's not perfect.
Yeah, for sure. Have there been any, as far as big trials that have been in the media, right? And this is just an opinion, and I want to get your opinion on this, where you feel like, oh no, they got that completely wrong. Obviously you don't know like all the ins and outs and facts, right? But for example, a big one in the 90s was like OJ, right? I think, more recently, they had like the whole Casey Anthony, right? And so has there ever been like a trial where you're just like that, they just completely got it wrong?
Well, you mentioned OJ, and I was the prosecutor when the OJ Simpson trial was unfolding. And people ask me that all the time, like, they got it wrong. I have kind of a unusual answer to that question, because they got it right and they got it wrong. And let me explain what I mean. From the evidence I've seen, and I've actually seen some evidence in that case that is not public. I've attended a seminar. I've seen some autopsy pictures of Nicole Simpson and some things that were not out in the public. But in my personal opinion is that O.J. Simpson murdered his wife, Nicole, and Ron Goldman, who was basically a waiter at a local restaurant, who came to bring home her eyeglasses that she left behind. My opinion is that he murdered them. Yes, the evidence is so overwhelming. Glove, DNA, motive. Who else wanted to kill her? There's a lot I could say about why I think he did it. But hear me out. The jury decided to nullify that case for other legitimate reasons, which is the police in LA had been corrupt as hell for a long time. Minorities in LA were like, we've had enough of it. By bad luck, Mark Furman, one of the lead detectives, was obviously a racist. So the jury said, we know OJ killed Nicole and Ron Goldman, but we're going to let him go because of all the stuff that has happened here and in America that has been racist in our past. And so I think they got it right in that's the jury system. That's called jury nullification. The guy did it, but you're still not going to find him guilty because you want to send a message. So my belief is that OJ killed those people, but that the jury correctly decided that and sent the message they wanted to send.
Interesting take. Yeah. No, you're right. Can you imagine if he would have been found guilty? Right. Everything was really tense at that time, It could have been real bad.
Yeah, I know. It's a shame. The family of Ron Goldman prevailed in a civil suit subsequently. I think OJ screwed up again. He got involved in some stupid robbery in Las Vegas. But I think he killed them. I really do. The evidence is so overwhelming. I've done a lot of DNA cases. We'll see what happens with this case, this new case with this serial killer. They have DNA off hair. That can be a little tricky, mitochondrial DNA. I may be your only one of your listeners who knows that DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. So I've had a lot of DNA cases. I did a murder case where one spot of blood, was on a guy's shirt, and he had killed two people with a crowbar. It was the messiest, bloodiest scene I've ever been to. There was blood on the ceiling, and the defense attorney was like, this guy would be covered in blood. But no, it's just the way it went down, and we called in a blood spatter analysis expert to explain that. But this guy had one spot of blood on his shirt, and it connected him to the crime. And that was good enough for the jury. So I'm a big believer in forensics. And in OJ, they had more than enough. And they had motive. You have to come up with a plausible alternative. Who else wanted to cut off Nicole's head, practically?
Right.
So it's a strange game we play. It's a very strange game.
You know what? That draws kind of a parallel to what kind of is going on now. You mentioned all the Trump indictments, right? And I'm wondering if, that whole jury nullification thing could be a factor here because, what if, he's found guilty and has to go to jail and he can't run for president and things. Oh, I don't even know if that's the case, but, what about his army of goons that are going to go and cause a big ruckus,
It is going to be amazing to see how this unfolds, particularly since he's running for re-election. In the middle of a campaign, he's going to have, he'll have one trial at least. They may move others beyond November of 24, but it's unprecedented. We have never had, in the history of the United States, a president or a former president been charged with criminal offenses. And now we have Mr. Trump, it looks like Atlanta's going to come down this week, and he's going to have 4 of them. And the jury can nullify. All he needs, remember, it's very hard to convict someone of a crime. You have to have 12-0 to convict, and it has to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Flip that around and say it in the reverse. All you need for a hung jury is one juror to have a reasonable doubt. Of course, the prosecution can try it over again. You get a redo, but it's not easy to convict someone. And Mr. Trump has a huge following of millions of people. So the odds are he's going to get some jurors who are sympathetic to his side of the story, that it's, all a witch hunt or what have you. I'll have to see the evidence before I make up my mind, but it's going to be very interesting, I think, what happens in his cases. And nullification, like OJ, is a distinct possibility. Yes, I see that.
And it makes me wonder, too, with jurors, right? Like, nowadays, it's really telling as far as like where your mindset is with the stuff you post on social media. And I'm wondering if that's something that's looked at these days when selecting jurors, right? Like, before I got into the career that I do during, with my day job and whatnot, I was interested in possibly going into law enforcement. I remember with one agency, like, they're like, log into your Facebook for me. I'm like, what the hell? Right? What do you mean log into my Facebook, right? And they wanted to see who I was.
That's very interesting. I have heard particularly defense attorneys ask during the voir dire process. That's the process of picking a jury. We call it voir dire. It's a French term. It means to speak the truth. I have heard defense attorneys ask the court for that permission to research the jurors. But I will say this about social media, text, email. Hey, your listeners out there, be careful what you write and send, because that is totally admissible in court. And you see it every day. Now that our world is, everyone has a cell phone, everyone has some social media. Particularly in a case involving passion, like a domestic violence or even a divorce case, lawyers will look at your emails where you say, all these terrible things against your spouse, and you will regret it when they bring that up in court and they say, isn't it true you called your wife X, Y, and Z and told her to drop dead? And, those things come back to haunt people every day. So, I do my usual practice. If I write an angry email, if I'm upset at another lawyer or something, and then I delete it. Yeah. I'll wait 24 hours and I cool off and then I respond. because those things will come back to haunt you. Lawyers don't send letters anymore. It used to be, before my time, in the older days, you'd write a letter and you'd put down in there what what the person, said. Now it's all back and forth in text, real time. So you have to be very careful. And so yeah, those things are totally admissible in court. As far as background, that day is coming where people are you can't bring your cell phone into the jury room. Mm-hmm. They make you leave it outside in a basket, and people freak out. I mean, I'm sure some of your listeners can identify with that. I've seen it. I've seen people say, like, I have to be in touch with my children. What am I going to do about childcare? I have to have my phone. Some people, if you take their cell phone away, it's like cutting off their hand. Mm-hmm. They literally cannot part with it even for an hour. They wouldn't know what to do. That's how addictive it is in our culture right now. But you can't bring it into the jury room or research or Google or look up on a map where the crime scene was. You can't do any of that. Mm-hmm. Your verdict has to be based on the evidence presented in the trial and nothing else. And that's why they take your cell phone away. But people are very unhappy about that.
That is worrisome because people do not know how to think anymore on their own, and I can imagine, like, it's a practice in trying to pay attention, right? The whole idea is just pay attention to the damn, facts, right? But I'm sure they have that separation anxiety from their cell phone and are so worried about all of the things they're missing out on social media and text and this and that, right? That they're not even thinking about what's going on. This is, and it's not just a court thing, right? This is even like simple everyday things like going to a concert. They now have these pouches that lock where you put your cell phone in a pouch, lock it up before you go into the venue, and you cannot access it during the performances, right?
I mean, well, in your lifetime, you're a lot younger than I am, it looks, but in your lifetime, the cell phone has gone from a novelty. I mean, I grew up without a cell phone. You actually had to talk to people. Mm-hmm. You actually had to go outside and play instead of looking at your phone for hours. But not to pick on younger people, I've got children who are now young adults, but I've grown up with cell phones. Everyone's different. We all know somebody who is so addicted to their cell phone that literally freak out if it's separated from them. We all know people like that. I mean, I love my cell phone. I run a whole law office through my phone. I'm doing media. I'm doing publicity for my book right now on my cell phone. So, I mean, I'm as dependent on technology as anyone else. But at least I'm confident in saying I can put my damn cell phone on the table and have dinner, with my family without looking at like, the Warriors beat the Knicks or, whatever the trivia is. So, yeah, I can separate from it, but I also recognize a lot of people cannot.
Yeah, look, I was the generation, I think that was the last sane generation because I didn't having a cell phone until I was an adult. And even then it was still kind of like in the early phases of like social media and texting and stuff like that. So I kind of grew up with the cell phone as an adult, right? But as far as like how people are now, right? They're just addicted to it. I think we who didn't have cell phones growing up, we see the advantages of all the cool stuff, like, oh, we use this for business. We can use this for, all the functional things, right? But now the people who were born and they had a cell phone attached to their hand, basically, they see it as like, oh, but I'm missing, my friend posting another selfie. I'm missing, an update, a live story, this and that, and I think that's what it is. They don't want to miss out on all of the updates and things like that,
Yeah, I know. But like my kids are younger. I have one granddaughter and I can see her already at age 5 starting to get into that mode where she's got to look at her iPad. And, I'm like, we put that down when we have dinner and when we're talking to people. I don't like it when I'm trying to have a conversation with someone and they're not looking in my eyes and they're looking at their phone and talking to me. I think that's kind of rude. But, all your listeners out there know what I bet every single one of your listeners who's listening to my voice right now has a cell phone. I mean, well, it used to be, I've watched this, and maybe 20 years ago, 15 years ago, you'd say, if any of you jurors have cell phones, you have to leave them outside. And maybe 2 people or 3 people or 5 people. But now, 12 out of 12, there's nobody really. I mean, you looked on the street, even homeless people have cell phones.
Yeah.
I mean, they're everywhere. So in jury duty, you can't bring that inside with you. And I see it every time. People start to freak out when you tell them, no, you can't have your cell phone until the day is over. Mm-hmm. And but that's just how it works in court. So yeah,
that's the evolution or de-evolution of it. Anyway, I want to jump back into gavel to gavel real quick, and whenever somebody's promoting a book or anything like that they're working on, like a film or anything like that, I always say, like, think back to the days where we used to check out videos at Blockbuster and things like that, right? You'd always kind of like walk around, pick up the tape or whatever, read the back, and then you decide, do I want this or not, right? Give me the pitch, right? Give me the Blockbuster pitch. Sell me on gavel to gavel because it sounds like an interesting book. I think, give us a quick synopsis of, and I think you kind of already explained a lot about it, but give that quick, elevator pitch about this is gavel to gavel. This is why you should read it.
Sure. Well, Gavel to Gavel is a murder mystery legal thriller, and it's based on my 30 years of experience as a prosecutor and a defense attorney. It examines what it's like in a real, very hyper-realistic way for a prosecutor to put together, investigate, and put together a murder trial in a courtroom. You have the whole story from start to finish, from gavel to gavel. You pick a jury, you put your witnesses on, you cross-examine them, you have rules of evidence, the judge gets involved, the jury decides, and you get a verdict. And you follow a murder trial from start to finish with a bunch of very interesting courthouse characters, the prosecutor, what it's like, the office politics. You've got the media breathing down his neck. It's really kind of a barn burner murder trial. And I've been told by my readers that they like that it's fast moving, it's quick, the chapters are short, the characters are interesting, and you can solve the case like you're on the jury by reading Gavel to Gavel by A.X. Foster. That's me.
Hey, that's a good pitch. Yeah. Now, before we close out, I just want to see if there's anything else you want to throw out there to the podcast world.
Well, my website is very easy to remember, axfoster.com. And you'll find everything about the book on that website, axfoster.com. You can even buy the book on Amazon there by clicking on it. And I think I'm very happy. I've got a lot of good reviews. People have enjoyed it. I'm working on my second book. I've just finished writing it. Nice. And now I'm submitting it to my publisher to take a look at. It's called Double Blind, and it's another Mac McIntyre murder mystery. And it's about, a case where a guy is accused of shooting a drug dealer to death. And so I finished my second book, and it's a series I'm writing. I want people to think of either the Hardy Boys or Law and Order. It's the same prosecutor, same courthouse, but a different murder trial each book. And so I've got the second one in the series written, and I'm already thinking about the third and fourth. I'm going to try and write one after another, as long as people are interested. For sure. It's called the Seneca County Courthouse Series. So book one is Gavel to Gavel in the Seneca County Courthouse Series, and book 2 is called Double Blind. And I haven't written book 3, but I got a couple ideas. So right. Go look at my Facebook page, A.X. Foster Author. I welcome new friends. There's a lot of stuff about the book out there on social media. And if anyone's interested in a real good courtroom barn burner type story, hey, jump on board. I'm happy to meet you, and you can always write in, ask me any questions you want.
Very good. All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. You know, I was really interested in a lot of the conversation today. I think a lot of people are going to get a lot of entertainment out of that. But yeah, thank you again. I wish you the best of luck. And you know, if anybody who's interested, check out Gavel to Gavel.
Thank you very much. Have a great one. I appreciate it. Nice talking to you.
Likewise. Thank you. And for everybody
Peace.
listening at home, I appreciate you. Thank you. Fuck you and good night.
Subscribe to the Ignorance is Strength podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts. Like, follow, and share on Facebook and Instagram at Ignorance is Strength Podcast and on Twitter at The Ignorance Pod.